So my background was I'm 31 or 2 years financial markets. So I grew up in that world. I grew up in the world of what is known as macro investing. Macro investing is when you look at all the asset classes everywhere around the world. So bonds, equities, commodities, currencies, credit, all of these things. And you try and look for what is the best return you can get. Maybe that's in India, maybe it's in China, maybe it's in the US. So that's the mindset. We have this 3D ever-evolving jigsaw puzzle in our heads of the world, driven by the global economy, hence why it's called macro, because it's macroeconomics. So it's driven by the business cycle trends of the global economy. So I did that. I was on the sales side for many years. I ended up at Goldman Sachs, where I started and ran the hedge fund sales business in equities and equity derivatives. My whole career basically had been getting to know the world's most famous hedge fund managers from kind of 1990 to 2000. It was like being taught acting by Robert De Niro or, Laurence Olivier. I mean, it's ridiculous. My daily calls would be Stan Druckenmiller, Paul Tudor Jones, the guys at Soros, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I started and ran the global macro hedge fund there. So that was now me taking these bets on a global basis over that kind of very rocky period of 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003 into 2004. Then I decided I had enough and I moved to the Mediterranean coast of Spain and started writing macroeconomic research. I'd been around the hedge fund business longer than most people at that point, and I had a huge amount of experience, both in knowing all of the players and also being a player myself. So I started writing from that perspective, macroeconomic research called The Global Macro Investor, which I still write 17 years later. And that's read by most of the world's most famous hedge fund managers, sovereign wealth funds, asset managers, that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, why did I know? Well, fine, I've got a lot of experience and I managed to piece together the jigsaw puzzle, but why does nobody else get to know this knowledge? This was wrong. And this was the rise of Occupy Wall Street. This is the rise of the anger of we're being screwed somewhere. We don't know how we're being screwed. And I believed in that too. Then I was in Europe for 2012. We almost lost our entire banking system, plus the EU itself. I remember having to go buy a generator and dried food because I thought we were going to follow Cyprus and we were going to lose the banks. Over one weekend, we would have lost the banks on Monday. The IMF forced Spain into taking an $18 billion bailout, which rescued it in time. Then eventually we end up with this Draghi, I'll do anything that it takes to stop Europe falling apart, essentially. And that stopped the tide. But the same thing happened. I was at the epicenter of it. I knew it was coming. We all made money out of it. And everybody around me, and I was yelling to everybody, listen, you've got to be careful. Friends of mine got destroyed in that in Spain. The property market imploded. Everybody's a real estate developer. Everybody got killed. Friends went bankrupt. And they were like, why didn't we know? And at first I'm like, I have been telling you this endlessly, but because I wasn't on television at the time, they don't take you seriously. I'm like, it's bizarre. I write stuff that the world's most famous investors read, but if I'm not on television, for an average guy, I don't have credibility.
Right.
I'm like, okay. I, at that point, started having two tangents, which is realizing I need to do something about it. That this disparate information level, that one group has everything, everybody else has nothing. And the other thing is I needed to make the world safer because we're kind of screwed. Because of this over-financialization, all the debt, that we could lose the system at any point. Nothing had gone away. The printing of money was just a way of wallpapering over the cracks that the earthquake had left behind. So I'm like, okay, what can I do? So the idea I had with a bunch of people was to try and set up the world's safest bank. And I tried to go and do that. It was slightly arrogant or stupid, probably, to try to do because it's not easy. And we got together quite an amazing group of people. Still, we tried in Singapore, we tried in Switzerland, we tried in the US, it was just hard to do. The system is not there for you to try and change. And so in that process, a friend of mine, one of my clients, tapped me on the shoulder and said, you should take a look at Bitcoin. This was 2012. And I'd been aware of Bitcoin and I took a good look at it. And he explained to me both the store of value proposition and the blockchain element, that anything could be trusted on the blockchain. I looked at this and I'm like, oh my God, this is the future that we need. Because the problem we've got is when a firm like Lehman Brothers goes bust, nobody knows who owns what. And somebody's going to get screwed in that equation. Just one of the very issues at the center of the system. Nobody knows who owns anything. So I started looking at that and I started writing articles and invested in it first time in 2013. 2014, I started Real Vision, because I wanted to democratize the very best financial information. Nobody gets access for an hour to the world's most famous hedge fund managers unless you've invested $100 million. Real Vision changed that equation entirely and said, listen, forget all this sound bites on CNBC of 3 minutes. It's worthless. We're going to give you an hour of the world's most successful investors, the best independent analysts and strategists, and then you have a level playing field. And that was a game changer. I mean, since Real Vision started in 2014, there's probably been 200 podcasts that's copied that model. So this is this movement. There's two things. There's the democratization of information, and then there's crypto. So crypto, as it starts building out as an ecosystem, you start to realize that, okay, this is now the fastest adoption of any technology in all recorded human history. I did a piece that was probably the most viewed piece I've ever done on YouTube. It was like, I don't know, 2 or 3 million views, called The Retirement Crisis. And it resonated because I kind of showed how people haven't seen it, check it out on YouTube. It's well worth your time. And it's a long time ago. It predicts a lot of what's going on now. And the point being is that there's a bunch of retirees, the baby boomers, and they've kind of screwed it all up because they've got all the debt. They've got too much equity exposure. It's really hard for them to retire. This is why the Federal Reserve don't like equities going down, because you've got this richest group on earth who are kind of stuck. They never got enough money to retire on. But I want to look through the eyes of the millennials. So they are 32 years old. At the same age, their parents at 32, the baby boomers, had all-time cheap valuations of equities, all-time cheap bonds, all-time cheap credit, all-time cheap property, right? So they couldn't help but make money. They kind of screwed it up because they actually ended up going into debt as well. But they couldn't help but make money. So then the millennials had the opposite: all-time record valuations of equities, all-time record valuation for bonds, all-time record credit, all-time record highs in property. So I'm like, these guys are screwed unless something else comes along. And that thing is crypto. Because the future expected return of crypto, it's been growing at 213% a year in returns. That's how much it makes, even though it's very volatile. Sometimes it's down 70%. Over time, you're making 213% a year. It has grown as an asset. It's gone up. I think it's 2 million% since inception. No other asset in all recorded history has ever done this. And we haven't even started. I still think there's probably another 100x from here. Not even the baby boomers got given that. The S&P didn't go up 100x since 1980. So this is the magnitude of what's there. So I'm screaming from the rooftop saying, you might be cynical. You might think you don't understand it. You might think you can't afford to play in this, but you have to listen, because this is the opportunity. You can't come back to me in 10 years' time and say, well, we missed all of that. All the rich people got richer. No, you, I, everybody else is saying, now is your time. Don't be irresponsible, dollar cost average, do all the right things, but here is your opportunity. This is the biggest opportunity I've ever seen. And I'm going to take advantage of it. And so should everybody else. This is not rich or poor. This is an every person opportunity. And we've never had this before, ever.